My name is Claire, and I'll never forget the night my husband asked me to prove myself to his family by cooking dinner. He said it would win their approval. I had been married to Mark for 6 months, and in that short time, I had learned that his family's approval was a currency I was expected to earn, but was never given freely. Instead, what unfolded that evening left them all speechless, not because of what I cooked, but because of what I refused to be. The pressure had been building from the day Mark slipped the ring on my finger. His family, the Hamiltons, were a tight-knit unit, sealed off from outsiders by a wall of quiet judgment and unspoken expectations. His mother, Eleanor, was the gatekeeper. She was a woman who communicated in polite, cutting remarks and looks that could freeze a room. His sister, Brenda, was her echo, a younger, sharper version who seemed to find my very existence a personal offense. His father, Robert, was a silent observer, a man who had long ago decided that agreement was the path of least resistance. When Mark first brought me to their sprawling suburban home for Sunday dinner, I felt like an exhibit. Eleanor looked me up and down, her thin lips pressed into a line that was not quite a smile. "I pictured you taller," was the first thing she said to me. It wasn't a question or an observation. It was a verdict. I was already failing to meet an invisible standard. Throughout that first dinner, they spoke around me, not to me. They reminisced about family vacations I hadn't been on and shared inside jokes I couldn't understand. Mark would squeeze my hand under the table, a gesture I initially thought was for comfort, but soon realized was a plea for my patience. He wanted me to endure it, to nod and smile and wait for an opening that never came. The 6 months that followed were a masterclass in subtle exclusion. Eleanor would call Mark and ask about his day, never once asking to speak to me. Brenda would post old photos on social media of Mark with his ex-girlfriend, captioning them with things like, "Remember the good old days?" When I brought it up to Mark, he would sigh and run a hand through his hair, a gesture of exhaustion that made me feel like I was the source of his problems. "They just need time to get to know you, Claire," he'd say. They're protective of me, but they weren't getting to know me. They were testing me. Every interaction was a pop quiz on my suitability to be a Hamilton. Did I dress the right way? Did I have the right opinions on politics? Did my job as a financial consultant at a small firm carry enough prestige? The answer was always no. The topic of my cooking skills came up, as I knew it eventually would. It was Eleanor's favorite weapon. At a family barbecue, she watched me assemble a simple garden salad, her eyes narrowed in scrutiny. "In our family, the women know their way around a kitchen," she announced to no one in particular. "It's a sign of a good wife, a woman who knows how to care for her husband." I felt my cheeks burn. I looked at Mark, waiting for him to say something, anything. To tell her that I cared for him in 1,000 other ways, that my worth wasn't tied to an apron. But he just gave a weak, uneasy smile and changed the subject. The silence was a betrayal that rang louder than any insult. Later that week, he came to me with the request. We were in our kitchen, the one place that was supposed to be our sanctuary. He was leaning against the counter, avoiding my eyes. "My mom's birthday is coming up," he started, his voice hesitant. "I was thinking, maybe we could host a dinner here." I knew where this was going. "You want me to cook for them?" I said flatly. He finally looked at me, his expression pleading. "It would mean so much to them, Claire. To my mom. She was just saying the other day, she asked if you could even cook." He said it as if he were quoting an amusing anecdote, but the sting was sharp and real. "And what did you say?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I told her of course you could." He took a step closer, taking my hands in his. They felt cold. "Look, I know they've been difficult, but this could be your chance. If you just make them one amazing meal, it will win them over. It'll show them you're trying, that you want to be part of the family. Please, Claire, just impress them this one time. Just impress them." The words echoed in my head. He wasn't asking me to share a part of myself with them. He was asking me to perform, to put on a show to gain the approval of people who had shown me nothing but disdain. He saw their cruelty not as a problem to be solved, but as an obstacle for me to overcome. He was asking me to fix something I hadn't broken. I felt a profound sense of loneliness wash over me. In this marriage, when it came to his family, I was on my own. The whispers got louder after that. The dinner was set for Saturday, and the week leading up to it was filled with their helpful suggestions, each one a thinly veiled insult. Brenda called me one afternoon, her voice dripping with fake concern. I was just talking to Mom and we were thinking, you shouldn't try to do anything too complicated, she said. Remember Mark's ex, Amanda? She was a phenomenal cook. She once made a beef Wellington from scratch, but no one expects that from you, of course. Maybe just stick to a roast chicken. It's classic, safe. Every mention of Amanda was a deliberate jab, a reminder that I was a replacement, and a poor one at that. They held her up as the gold standard I would never meet. I would hear stories about her perfect pies, her flawless dinner parties, the way she charmed Eleanor and Robert effortlessly. I was living in the shadow of a ghost they refused to let go. My own mother had warned me about this. Some families, she'd told me before the wedding, don't want a new daughter. They just want a new audience for their old traditions. I hadn't understood the weight of her words then. I do now. Eleanor called next. Claire, dear, she began, her tone syrupy. I was at the market and saw some lovely organic lettuces. I thought I'd pick some up for you for the dinner. You can make a nice simple salad to start. That way, there's less room for mistakes with the main course. The condescension was suffocating. She didn't think I could even be trusted to buy my own vegetables. I felt small, incompetent, and deeply humiliated. I would walk into a room at their family gatherings, and the conversation would halt for a split second, their smiles tightening before resuming. I was the interruption, the foreign object in their perfectly curated world. Each night, Mark would come home from work and ask, "So, what's on the menu for Saturday? Got it all planned out?" He was oblivious to the torment, or perhaps he chose to be. He saw the dinner as a simple solution, a box to be checked. If Claire cooks a good meal, family is happy, life is easy. He never once asked how I was feeling. He never defended me from their barbs. His only refrain, repeated like a mantra, was, "Just impress them once, Claire. Everything will be different after that." I started to believe him, or at least I wanted to. I spent 2 nights scrolling through complex recipes online, watching videos of professional chefs, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I imagined myself in the kitchen, sweating over a hot stove, juggling pots and pans, with Eleanor and Brenda's critical faces looming in my mind. I pictured serving a slightly overcooked piece of fish or a lumpy sauce, and the look of smug satisfaction they would exchange. The thought made me feel sick. This wasn't about food. It was a game, and the rules were designed for me to lose. They didn't want to be impressed. They wanted to see me try and fail. They wanted the satisfaction of confirming their belief that I was not, and never would be, good enough. That was the moment something inside me shifted. The hurt and humiliation didn't disappear, but they crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. Mark wanted me to impress them. Fine, I would impress them, but I would do it on my own terms. I closed the recipe book. I shut my laptop. I picked up my phone and made a single call. I had known Chef Antoine Dubois for years. I was a junior loan officer at a small community bank when he first came in. A young, ambitious chef with a brilliant concept for a French fusion restaurant, but no capital. His application had been rejected by every major bank in the city. They saw him as a risk. I saw passion and a solid business plan. I went to bat for him. I spent weeks reworking his proposal, arguing his case to the loan committee, and convincing my superiors to take a chance. They did. And his restaurant, L'Artiste, became one of an acclaimed culinary destination in the city. He never forgot what I did for him. "Claire," he had told me at his grand opening, "anything you ever need, you just have to ask. I owe you." I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, but when he answered the phone, his voice was warm and familiar. "Antoine, it's Claire Carter," I said. "Claire! What a wonderful surprise. How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, my voice steady. "And I need to cash in that favor." I explained the situation. I didn't give him all the painful details, just the basics. I was hosting a dinner for my in-laws, and it needed to be spectacular. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he just chuckled softly. "Consider it done," he said. "My kitchen is your kitchen. What time should we be there?" We worked out the details. He and a sous chef would arrive in the afternoon with everything they needed. They would use my kitchen to prepare a 5-course meal fit for a king. They would be discreet, and he would make his appearance only when I gave the signal. A sense of calm settled over me for the first time all week. I wasn't just planning a dinner anymore. I was staging a performance. The Hamiltons wanted a show. I was about to give them one they would never forget. On the night of the dinner, the air in our apartment was thick with tension. Mark was a nervous wreck, pacing back and forth between the living room and the kitchen, checking the table setting for the 10th time. I, on the other hand, was perfectly calm. I sat on the sofa, sipping a glass of water, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress. Antoine and his assistant had been there for hours, working quietly and efficiently in the kitchen. The aromas wafting out were divine, but I kept the door closed. Mark just assumed I was a culinary genius in the making. "Are you sure you don't need any help?" he asked, peering at the closed kitchen door. "You've been in there all day." "Everything is under control," I said with a serene smile. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected me to be flustered, stressed, and begging for his moral support. My composure seemed to unnerve him. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. Mark rushed to open it, plastering a wide, welcoming smile on his face. Eleanor, Robert, and Brenda swept in, their eyes immediately scanning the apartment, judging every detail from the flowers on the table to the art on the walls. Eleanor handed me a bottle of cheap grocery store wine, a gift that was also an insult. "A little something for the cook," she said with a smirk. Brenda sniffed the air. "Smells ambitious," she commented, her tone implying I had aimed far beyond my abilities. They settled into their seats at the dining table. I could feel their collective skepticism hanging in the air. This was my trial, and they were the jury, ready to deliver a guilty verdict. "Just smile and serve, Claire," Mark whispered nervously as he took his seat. "You've got this." He had no idea. I went into the kitchen, where Antoine gave me a reassuring nod. His sous chef, a young man named Pierre, was plating the first course. It was a work of art. Seared scallops on a bed of saffron risotto, drizzled with a balsamic glaze and garnished with microgreens. I carried the plates out, my hands perfectly steady. I placed one in front of each of them. There was a moment of stunned silence. This was not the simple roast chicken they had been expecting. This was something from the cover of a food magazine. Eleanor was the first to speak, her fork hovering hesitantly over the scallop. "My goodness, Claire," she said, her voice strained. "This is quite the presentation." Brenda stared at her plate, her mouth slightly agape. Robert, for his part, looked genuinely impressed. Mark just looked confused, as if he couldn't reconcile the woman he married with the dish in front of him. They took their first bites. A new silence fell over the table, this one different. It wasn't the silence of judgment, but of shock. Their expressions changed from skepticism to disbelief. Eleanor's fork trembled slightly as she took another bite. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the flavor. When she opened them, she looked directly at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. This tastes like Michelin's star," she whispered, the words tumbling out as if against her will. The rest of the meal unfolded in the same surreal fashion. The second course was a wild mushroom consommé with truffle oil. The main course was individual rosemary lamb chops, cooked to a perfect medium rare, served with potato dauphinoise and asparagus spears. Each dish was more exquisite than the last. The conversation was stilted. They were so busy trying to process what was happening that their usual stream of passive-aggressive comments dried up. They ate every single bite, their plates practically clean. They kept stealing glances at me, as if trying to solve a puzzle. I remained calm, simply clearing the plates and smiling politely, enjoying their discomfort. My silence was my power. I was no longer the one being scrutinized. I was the one in control. Brenda, finally recovering her voice, tried to regain the upper hand. She let out a forced, brittle laugh. "Okay, Claire, fess up," she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "There's no way you made this. Did you have it catered?" It was the out they were all looking for, a logical explanation that would restore their sense of order and put me back in my place. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide with the same question. "Claire?" I just smiled. "I told you I would handle dinner," I said, my voice even. Their confusion was a delicious thing to watch. They were squirming, caught between the undeniable quality of the food and their unshakable belief in my incompetence. They couldn't compliment me because that would be admitting they were wrong about me. But they couldn't criticize the food because it was, by all accounts, perfect. Finally, it was time for dessert. I went into the kitchen one last time. Antoine was plating a deconstructed lemon tart with a raspberry coulis and a shard of caramelized sugar. It was magnificent. "Ready?" he asked with a grin. "Ready," I replied. I carried out the dessert plates and set them down. As they stared at the final masterpiece, I cleared my throat softly. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," I said. On cue, the kitchen door swung open. Chef Antoine Dubois walked out, wiping his hands on his pristine white apron. He was tall and charismatic, and he commanded the attention of the room instantly. He walked directly to me, ignoring everyone else, and placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Good to see you again, Claire," he said, his voice a rich baritone. "I hope everything was to your liking." "I'm glad I could repay the favor tonight." The room froze. Forks clattered onto plates. Eleanor's eyes were wide with disbelief. Brenda's jaw had dropped. Robert simply stared, speechless, and Mark turned pale. The color drained from his face as he looked from Antoine to me, the pieces of the evening finally clicking into place. He realized he hadn't been part of a team effort. He had been part of the audience. I hadn't played by their rules. I had created my own. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before I spoke. I looked around the table, meeting each of their stunned gazes. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. "You asked me to impress you," I said calmly. "I never said how." Eleanor's infamous smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of utter humiliation. Brenda looked down at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. It was Robert who finally broke the silence, his voice filled with a new, unfamiliar respect. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "maybe she doesn't need to prove herself after all." Mark just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet, agreeable woman he expected to bend to his family's will, but as a stranger with a depth and strength he had never bothered to discover. I leaned back in my chair, a soft smile playing on my lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of peace. In that moment, I knew I didn't need their approval. I had my own career, my own friends, my own life. I had my own power. Their respect, if it ever came, would be forced, not freely given. And that was fine by me. I had stopped playing their game. I lost a husband that night in a way. The man I thought I married, the one who would stand by my side, was an illusion. But I learned that my worth wasn't something to be debated over a dinner table. It was mine, and it wasn't up for negotiation. What would you have done? Cooked for days to please them? Or flipped the script like I did? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.